For 3 years I let my late son's uncle organize an annual charity run in Miles's memory, never suspecting that every dollar raised, nearly $90,000 in total, was being funneled straight into his failing landscaping business and his own mortgage payments. My name is Odalys Castellano, and before this happened, I believed I understood the people I trusted, and the life I had built. I believed every registration fee, every sponsorship banner, every paper cup of water passed out at the finish line was helping pay for heart screenings for kids who played sports and might otherwise slip through the cracks the way my son Miles had. I believed that because I wanted to believe it. After Miles died, grief made me desperate for any version of the world that could still hold a little meaning. He was 11 years old, all elbows and quick smiles, the kind of boy who never walked anywhere when he could run. He loved soccer, he loved bike rides, he loved climbing too high on the oak tree in our backyard and making me yell at him until he laughed and climbed back down. He had no history of serious illness, no warning, no long sickness I could prepare myself for. One afternoon he was at practice, chasing a ball under a sun so bright it seemed almost insulting. And an hour later he was gone because of a sudden cardiac condition nobody knew he had. People say the words sudden and unexpected as if they soften the blow. They don't. They make it worse. They leave you with a life divided into before and after, and the after is just a room you have to keep walking around in. The first year after Miles died, I couldn't stand the sight of his soccer cleats by the front door. I couldn't fold the laundry in his room without sitting down on the edge of his bed and crying until I had no strength left. I was functioning only because the world insisted on continuing. Bills arrived. Work emails came in. People brought casseroles and whispered that he was in a better place, which I know they meant as comfort but felt to me like a sentence I had not agreed to. Rhett was the one who came up with the memorial run. He was my ex-husband Victor's younger brother, the kind of man who always seemed a little too eager to be seen as generous. He had a broad smile, an easy laugh, and the gift of making every idea sound like it had been waiting for him to invent it. At family gatherings, he talked over everyone and somehow made it seem like he was including them. He was good at remembering birthdays, good at saying the right thing after a funeral, good at appearing useful when there was a room full of pain and very few people who knew what to do with it. He sat across from me in my kitchen about a year after Miles died, with a folded paper napkin in his hand, and told me he had been thinking about a way to honor Miles that would actually help other children. A run, he said, leaning forward as if he were sharing something sacred. Not just a one-time thing. An annual memorial run. Something people can look forward to every year. Miles loved running. He was always out there first. He wasn't wrong. Miles had loved running in that reckless, wild way children do when they feel certain their bodies are invincible. He liked being first because he liked hearing his friends complain. He liked the feeling of being winded and laughing through it. Rhett knew that, because he had come to a few of Miles's games and pretended he and Miles had their own private jokes. And where would the money go? I asked. Rhett's answer came too quickly, which I didn't notice then because I was already half crying. There's a youth cardiac screening charity, he said. They do free screenings for athletes. It's perfect, Odalys. It's exactly the kind of work Miles would have believed in. If he had been screened, maybe things would have been different. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because this could save somebody else. That line hit me harder than anything else. Maybe because it sounded like purpose. Maybe because it sounded like a way to take all that senselessness and point it somewhere useful. I remember looking down at my hands and seeing that they were shaking. You'd really organize it? He nodded immediately. I already know a few people who can help. I'll get a permit, set up registration, find sponsors. You don't have to carry any of the stress. You just have to let me honor Miles. That was the moment I should have been careful. I know that now. Back then, all I heard was the promise that my son's death might mean something to somebody besides me. So I said yes. The first run was small, but it was beautiful in the way community events can be when they still feel raw. There were folding tables, homemade signs, a few local businesses that donated water and granola bars, and families I barely knew wearing shirts with Miles's name on them. Some people had known him, some had only heard the story through mutual friends, and some came because they had lost children themselves and understood the shape of the grief without needing details. At the starting line, I stood beside a banner with Miles's face printed across it, a photo of him laughing at the beach with sand on his nose. Every time I looked at that banner, it felt like someone was reaching into my chest and turning something. Rhett gave a short speech before the run. He talked about Miles's smile, his energy, his bright future. He said we were doing this to make sure no other family had to learn about a hidden heart condition after it was too late. He said the proceeds would go to a charity that offered free screenings for young athletes, and that maybe, just maybe, some child's life would be saved because of what we were doing in Miles's name. People cried. I cried. When the runners crossed the finish line, volunteers handed out water and metal ribbons with Miles's name printed on them. I remember one mother kneeling down to tell me her daughter had been nervous about sports physicals, and this event had reminded her to get her checked. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and I went home that day believing that if grief had not been spared, at least it had been transformed. The run came back the next year. Then the year after that. It grew steadily. More runners, more local sponsors, more shirts, more tents, more social media posts with Miles's smiling face and the charity's logo beside it. Rhett got very good at the kind of public language people trust. He talked about legacy. He talked about hope. He talked about preventing another loss like ours. Every year I stood at the finish line in the same place. Every year I cried. Every year I told myself the tears were easier because they were mixed with meaning. And every year I believed the donations were going where they were supposed to go. That belief lasted until a phone call in the spring of this year. It came from a woman named Denise Morrow, the development director at the youth cardiac screening charity we had always listed as the beneficiary. Her voice was gentle in that careful way people use when they are about to deliver bad news but don't yet know the shape of it. "Miss Castellano, I'm sorry to bother you directly," she said. "I wasn't sure who else to call, and I wanted to ask about the Miles Memorial Run." I smiled automatically even though she couldn't see me. The event had become one of the few annual things I still associated with something close to joy. "Of course," I said. "What's going on?" There was a pause. "We've been reviewing our records because we're updating our public donor acknowledgments. We've had the run listed in our materials for 3 years, but we cannot find any donation record from the event. Not one transfer, not one check, not one payment through our nonprofit portal. I assumed perhaps the family had decided to redirect the funds elsewhere, but when I reached out to the event contact, nobody had ever informed us of a change." I sat down very slowly. "I'm sorry," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. "What do you mean you never received anything?" "I mean exactly that," Denise said. "Nothing. We've checked every year. We were actually surprised because the run was promoted publicly as benefiting us. We didn't want to embarrass anyone by asking too early, so we waited, assuming perhaps the transfer was delayed or the accounting was handled differently. But we have no record of receiving a single dollar." I remember staring at the kitchen wall. There was a mark near the thermostat where Miles had once thrown a rubber ball and chipped the paint. I had never fixed it. Looking at it that day felt like being shoved backward through time. "Could there be some clerical issue?" I asked. Denise was still polite, still careful, but now her concern had sharpened. "Anything is possible. But our finance office has checked repeatedly. We have no deposit, no mailed check, no restricted gift, no event remittance. Nothing." I asked her to send me anything she had, then ended the call because I could feel myself beginning to shake. I did not call Rhett screaming. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, drive to his house, and demand that he look me in the eye and explain how the event held in my dead child's name had somehow failed to send a single cent to the charity attached to it. But grief had taught me something useful if cruel. Rage is a bad investigator. So instead of exploding, I sat very still and forced myself to think. If the charity had received nothing, then where had the money gone? I started with the registration platform. Rhett had always handled the technical side of the event, but I had been listed as the family contact. After a long, humiliating verification process where I had to explain, over and over, that I was Miles's mother, and that the event was held in his memory, the platform sent me a financial history for all 3 years. The numbers made my stomach tighten. Across 3 years, the run had brought in just over $90,000. 90,000, not a couple thousand in expenses and confusion. Not a miscommunication over 1 year's net proceeds. $90,000 collected in donations, entry fees, sponsors, and matching gifts. And there was no evidence it had gone to the charity. I called Denise back and asked her to confirm, once more, that she had nothing. She did not sound offended that I was checking. She sounded frightened for me. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I wish I had better news." I remember sitting at my dining table after that call, looking at my late son's school photo on the sideboard, and feeling something in me turn cold. Rhett had not just made a mistake. He had built a recurring event around my child's death and used it to pull in money under the moral shield of grief. I needed proof before I accused him, because once you say a thing like that out loud, you can never take it back. I called Priscilla Nakamura, An attorney a friend had once described as the person you call when the paperwork is lying to you. Priscilla specialized in charitable fraud, financial disputes involving nonprofit promises, and all the ugly places where money and trust overlap. When I told her the story, she did not interrupt once. She only asked questions, precise and measured, until I was hoarse. "Do you have anything in writing?" she asked. "The event materials? Any emails? Any payment records? Anything showing the charity was named publicly?" I had more than I thought. The run had a website, event flyers, social media posts, sponsor thank yous, and old email chains from the first year when Rhett had asked my opinion on the charity name. I sent everything. By the end of the day, Priscilla called me back. "I want to be careful with this," she said, "but based on what you've told me, there are several serious issues here. If donations were solicited under the representation that they'd go to a charity and then they were diverted elsewhere, that's not a misunderstanding. That's potentially theft, fraud, and a charity solicitation violation." The word theft landed harder than I expected. Fraud sounded legal. Theft sounded like a hand in my purse. Could he have just forgotten to transfer something? I asked, though I knew how weak that sounded. Not for 3 years, no. I closed my eyes. Then I need to know where it went. "Exactly," she said. "I'm going to recommend a forensic accountant. We need a paper trail before we move. If he's using a business account, or if the funds were mixed, we need to reconstruct the flow. Don't confront him yet. If he knows you're onto him, he may move what's left or create a cover story." I wanted to scream at the unfairness of that sentence, not because it was wrong, but because it meant I had to keep breathing the same air as Rhett while someone else proved what he had done. I had to continue functioning around him. I had to keep my face still. Priscilla referred me to Cornelius Akebi, a forensic accountant with an exacting mind and a voice so calm it made you sit straighter on the phone. He asked to see everything. Bank records if I could get them, event receipts, sponsorship lists, registration platform summaries, any invoices Rhett had sent, any screenshots, any communications. The next 4 weeks became one of the strangest periods of my life. On the outside, I was still helping with this year's event. Rhett called me about route permits. He texted me shirt logo proofs. He asked whether the charity wanted to set up a booth. He talked about expanding the 5K into something bigger, maybe adding a kids' fun run, maybe bringing in a local news crew. And I answered him. I answered him while my insides felt like they were being pulled apart. There is a special kind of nausea that comes from hearing someone speak with confidence while you are waiting for evidence that may reveal they have been lying to you for years. His messages were cheerful, some even affectionate. He wrote things like, "Miles would be proud. We're making a real difference. Can't wait to see the turnout this year." I read those texts with my teeth clenched so hard my jaw hurt. One afternoon I met him in person at a coffee shop to go over logistics because he insisted we needed to stay on top of the details. He had his laptop open, a spreadsheet on the screen, and he looked exactly as he always had, polished, busy, pleased with himself. "We're probably going to hit our highest numbers yet," he said, stirring his coffee. "People respond to a good cause, especially when there's a personal story behind it." I nearly laughed at the bitterness of that. "Do they?" I asked. He looked up, startled by my tone. I smiled a little too tightly. "I mean, yes, they do." He kept talking. He said the sponsors were eager. He said the community was invested. He said the event was becoming something special. I listened to the man who might have been lying through his teeth while he praised the memory of my son, and I had to physically press my nails into my palm, so I would not say anything that would destroy the investigation before it had even begun. Cornelius worked quietly but efficiently. The first thing he confirmed was that the donations had not gone to some hidden charitable account or been parked temporarily somewhere legitimate. They had gone into a business account belonging to Rhett's landscaping company, Greenline Property Services, a name I had seen on trucks and invoices and never once thought to question. The landscaping company had been struggling for years, according to the records Cornelius dug up. Debts, late vendor payments, tax issues, a line of credit that had been stretched thinner and thinner. The company had been losing money for nearly 4 years, which lined up almost perfectly with the first memorial run. That should have shocked me less than it did. At that point, a terrible clarity began to settle in. The event had not merely benefited from Rhett's good intentions. It had functioned as his financial lifeline. Cornelius mapped the deposits year by year. The first year's run proceeds were deposited in a lump sum within days of the event closing, then used to cover payroll, overdue supplier bills, and a tax liability that would have otherwise come due on the landscaping business. The second year followed the same pattern. The third year was even more blatant, with payments moving almost immediately to cover business debts, and then a series of mortgage transfers that had nothing to do with the company at all. Rhett had used some of the money to pay his own mortgage. That detail made me feel physically ill. I kept thinking about the registration table, the boxes of shirts, the children handing out water, the sponsor banners, me at the finish line with tears in my eyes. At the exact same time those things were happening, Rhett had been moving the money into his personal life like a man quietly moving sandbags away from a flood. I asked Cornelius to keep going. He found that Rhett's landscaping business had been barely surviving by the time he proposed the first run, which meant the event had come along at exactly the right moment to keep the company afloat long enough for him to pretend he was just getting through a rough patch. There were invoices that had been paid with run proceeds and later marked as ordinary business expenses. Some of the transaction descriptions had been scrubbed. The books were messy enough to create plausible deniability if no one examined them closely, but once Cornelius compared the timing of event payouts with the business account activity, the pattern was obvious. It was not a coincidence. It was a system. For 3 years, Rhett had used the emotional weight of a dead child to create an unchallenged stream of money into his failing business. When Cornelius emailed me the summary, I stared at the page for a long time before I could read it all. $90,000. Diverted. Misappropriated. Traced into business operations and personal mortgage payments. He added a note that the total might be slightly higher if some cash donations had never been recorded correctly in the first place. That last sentence stayed with me. Slightly higher. So even the number that enraged me was probably the minimum. I did not sleep much during those 4 weeks. I woke up every morning with the same sick awareness that the man my family had trusted with Miles's legacy had likely been robbing us from the start. Sometimes I would stand in the shower just to hear the water and keep myself from thinking too hard. Sometimes I would sit in Miles's room and try to remember his voice saying my name. Sometimes I would open old photos and feel guilty for looking at him now, because he could not consent to becoming the cover story for anyone's business rescue. There were moments when I worried maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was some explanation I could not see yet. Maybe Rhett had intended to repay the money and never could. Maybe he had convinced himself that the end still justified the means. Then I would think about Denise's voice on the phone. No record of a single dollar. And I would know there was no way to rationalize this into something acceptable. Priscilla advised me to stay calm until Cornelius finished reconstructing everything. If he knows you've discovered the cash flow, he may try to frame it as a loan, a temporary transfer, or an accounting mix-up. We need the whole chain. So I let Rhett keep talking about this year's event as if he were a good man managing a beloved tradition. We had one planning call that I still remember with a kind of sick precision. He was talking about expanding the route and adding more sponsors. If we get the local running club involved, we could double participation, he said. I think people want to give to something tangible. They want to know the money is helping kids. I sat on my couch holding my phone and said, "That's true." My own voice sounded strange to me. I could hear the effort it took to keep it even. He kept going. The charity's going to love the visibility. And honestly, Odalys, it's nice to feel like we're doing something that matters. I know Miles would have wanted that. The room went silent around me. I looked at Miles's picture on the mantel, his front teeth slightly crooked because he'd been due for braces before he died, and I had to swallow hard enough to make my throat ache. Yes, I said, he would have. Rhett did not notice the shift in my tone. Or if he did, he ignored it. That was the worst part of all. There was no visible monster in the story. There was a man speaking warmly about legacy while the evidence behind his back prepared to bury him. The 4th week ended with Cornelius calling me and saying, "I have enough." I asked him to repeat it. "I have enough to show intent, diversion, and personal benefit," he said. The funds were not only collected, they were redirected with a recurring pattern. The business account received them. The mortgage payments are traceable. There's no legitimate nonprofit transfer. This is more than a bookkeeping error. I remember sitting down on the kitchen floor. I had not done that since the first month after Miles died. "So he really did it," I said. Cornelius was quiet for a beat. "Yes," he said. After that, everything moved quickly and painfully. Priscilla drafted the complaint. She filed a civil claim for misappropriation of charitable proceeds and reported the matter to the state's charitable solicitation regulator. That part mattered because the event had been marketed under the promise that donations would benefit a specific nonprofit. That is not something the law takes lightly, especially when money has been solicited from the public under false pretenses. I had to give statements. I had to collect email threads. I had to hand over flyers, screenshots, text messages, and event pages that now looked grotesque to me, every one of them decorated with Miles's face and words like hope, legacy, and healing. The regulator asked me questions I had never imagined I would need to answer. Who controlled the funds? Who posted the event promotions? Who received donor acknowledgments? Had the nonprofit ever been paid before? No, I said. No. 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 That was the answer for everything. Then Priscilla told me the district attorney's office had reviewed enough evidence to open a criminal case. Rhett was charged with theft by deception. The first time I heard those words, I felt a weird split inside me. Part of me was relieved because the system had finally named what had happened. Another part of me wanted to vomit because no court label could capture the ugliness of using a dead child's memory as a shield for personal debt. When the police contacted Rhett, he did not deny everything. That surprised me more than if he had. He called me the next morning. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before answering. Odalys, he said, and I could hear immediately that he had been crying. I did not say hello. How long were you planning to keep pretending? I asked. There was a long silence. Then he said, very softly, I wasn't pretending. That answer made me grip the phone tighter. You took money raised in my son's name and put it into your business, he exhaled shakily. I know. I almost said something cruel then, but there was no point. The truth had already been uglier than anything I could invent. He started talking fast after that, words tripping over each other. He said the landscaping company had been in trouble longer than he had admitted to anyone. He said he had panicked the first year because he was behind on payroll and scared the business would collapse. He said he told himself it was temporary, just until things recovered. He said he had every intention of paying it back. I laughed then, but there was no humor in it. From where? I asked. You were paying yourself with memorial money. He was crying hard enough that I could hear him struggling to speak. I know, he said. I know how it looks. How it looks. My voice rose before I could stop it. Rhett, you used Miles to make people trust you. You used a child's death to hide your business problems. Do you hear yourself? He said my son's name then, and I nearly ended the call. Don't, I said. He kept talking anyway, in the broken defensive way guilty people do when they suddenly realize the story they told themselves has stopped working outside their own head. He said he had thought once the event became successful, the money would be repaid discreetly. He said he had been ashamed. He said he knew he should have told me. He said the longer it went on, the harder it became to admit. All of that may have been true in some limited sense. It was also beside the point. Shame does not turn theft into charity. Fear does not transform fraud into accident. The fact that he had panicked did not erase the fact that he had then chosen, over and over again, to keep taking. You let me thank you, I said quietly. You let me stand at that finish line and cry like a fool while you spent the money on your mortgage. He did not answer that. He had no answer for that. The district attorney's office eventually offered him a plea agreement. He pled guilty in exchange for a restitution order covering the full $90,000. Priscilla was honest with me about what that meant. It means he's acknowledging responsibility, she said. It does not mean the money comes back quickly. If he's as overextended as the records suggest, collection may take years. I asked if he could go to prison. Possibly, she said. But for a first-time financial offense with a plea, the result may be more about restitution, probation, and a criminal record. The exact outcome will depend on the judge and sentencing factors. That answer made me angry in a different way, because there is no sentence long enough to match the feeling of being lied to through grief. The first hearing was worse than I expected. Rhett looked smaller in the courtroom. Not innocent, just diminished. He was still well-dressed, but his face had the slack, sleepless look of a man who had finally run out of confidence. When he saw me, he looked away almost immediately. I had prepared myself for that moment with more discipline than feeling. I had expected to hate him. Instead, I felt tired. His attorney tried to frame the matter as a desperate financial decision made under pressure. The prosecutor did not let that stand for long. They laid out the pattern. The event, the missing transfers, the business deposits, the mortgage payments, the public promotions attached to a nonprofit that had received nothing, the repeated nature of the deception, the emotional exploitation involved in leveraging a memorial fundraiser for a dead child. That phrase made me flinch. Leverage a memorial fundraiser for a dead child. It sounded as obscene in court as it felt in my kitchen. The judge asked Rhett if he understood the charges and the plea agreement. He said yes. The judge asked if anyone had forced him to divert the funds. He said no. The judge asked whether he understood that the restitution order was not optional. He said yes again, voice thin and barely audible. I wanted him to say something human. I wanted him to break down and tell the truth in a way that could somehow make the damage feel less calculated. Instead, he sat there looking like a man finally forced to watch the consequences of his own good posture. Outside the courtroom, a reporter asked me if I wanted to comment on the charity run and my son's memory. I almost said no. Then I looked at the microphone and realized there was one thing I did want said clearly. Miles was a child, I said. He should never have been used as a shield for someone else's debts. That quote circulated locally for a while. I didn't ask for it to. I didn't need the attention. But people I had never met started sending messages. Some were from parents who had organized memorial fundraisers themselves and now felt sick thinking about how vulnerable that kind of trust can be. Some were from donors who had believed they were helping the charity and were furious they'd been misled. One woman wrote to tell me she had lost a daughter and had nearly cried when she heard my story because she knew exactly how sacred those events are to grieving families. That word sacred stayed with me, because that is what Rhett had violated, whether he understood it or not. He had treated grief as a revenue stream. Cornelius, who had gone from being my forensic accountant to something like a trusted witness in all this, sent me one final summary after the case closed. He said memorial fundraising built around a deceased child is uniquely difficult to police because families rarely question the money trail when the event itself is emotionally charged. The very thing that creates trust also creates blind spots. People assume that anyone willing to put on a run in a dead child's name must be acting with the highest integrity. He told me that assumption is exactly what bad people count on. I hated hearing that because it sounded practical and true. The other thing Cornelius said stayed with me longer. He said the detail that bothered him most was not the amount. It was that Rhett had watched me at the finish line every year, crying in public while believing the money was helping other children, and never once told me the truth. That was the part I could not stop imagining. Rhett standing somewhere nearby, maybe behind a table or beside a sponsor banner, looking at my face and knowing exactly what he had done. Me crying for Miles. Me thanking him. Me believing that Miles's death had been turned into something protective. There are betrayals that are loud and immediate, the kind that arrive with shouting and slammed doors. This was not that. This was quieter. It was a betrayal that lived in program brochures and volunteer sign-in sheets and donated water bottles. It lived in the space between what people believed they were giving and what someone else decided to take. After the criminal case, the run as we had known it was finished. The old event website came down. The social media accounts were taken offline. The banners and branded shirts that had once made me feel proud now felt contaminated, as if every logo were hiding a receipt. My family did not handle the aftermath gracefully. There were arguments. Some relatives were furious and wanted to cut Rhett off entirely. Others were embarrassed and wanted to pretend the whole thing had been a misunderstanding because it was easier than admitting how badly everyone had been fooled. Victor, my ex-husband, was devastated in his own way. He kept saying he never imagined his brother would do something like that, which made me want to snap that I had once believed that too, and now I had the bill to prove it. Rhett tried, through lawyers, to ask whether some part of the case could remain private to protect the family's reputation. That request made me see red. What reputation? The reputation of a man who stole from a dead child's memorial? Priscilla shut that down quickly. There is no version of this where reputation comes before accountability, she told him through counsel. That was the last time I felt grateful for an attorney in the middle of heartbreak. The restitution plan was set up in a way that made sense on paper and still felt almost insulting in practice. Small monthly payments, garnished wages if necessary, sale of business assets where possible. Years, maybe longer, before the total could be recovered. Cornelius estimated that even with strict enforcement, the full amount would take a long time to pay back. The money was not sitting in a safe waiting to be returned. It had been spent on debts, bills, and living expenses. It had done exactly what stolen money does. It had vanished into the ordinary hunger of a failing life. That fact did not make me forgive him. It only made me understand how far gone the company had been when he decided that my son's memory was an acceptable bridge over the gap. Several months later, after the dust had settled enough that I could hear myself think, I met Denise from the charity in person. She was exactly as she had sounded on the phone, careful, sincere, and genuinely disturbed by what had happened. We sat in a small conference room at her office. She had brought a folder of records, though there was very little in it besides the event's public references and their internal notes showing repeated attempts to verify receipt of funds. "We should have pushed harder," she said, and tears filled her eyes. "I'm so sorry. We saw the event advertised and assumed everything was being handled privately. We should have asked for confirmation sooner." I did not want to absolve her, but I could see she meant it. "He used all of us," I said. She nodded. Yes. That conversation mattered to me because it was the first time I had spoken to someone from the charity without feeling like I needed to defend myself. Denise had no reason to lie. She had no reason to protect Rhett. She simply wanted the truth. That had become rare enough to feel moving. The charity helped us rebuild the memorial event from the ground up the following year. This time we changed everything. The donations were processed directly through the charity's own platform. There was no intermediary account, no event organizer with unilateral control over the money, no ambiguity. Every dollar was tracked on the charity's website in real time. They issued receipts directly to donors. They posted public acknowledgement logs. They handled the accounting themselves, and we were informed every step of the way. I insisted on that. Not because I expected fraud at every turn, but because after what happened, trust had to be earned through systems, not sentiment. The new event was smaller, fewer sponsors, less spectacle, no giant banners, no speeches designed to make grief look polished, but it was honest. On the morning of the run, I stood at the starting line and looked at the shirts with Miles's name on them. I saw families stretching, volunteers passing out water, children bouncing nervously on the balls of their feet. I saw the charities table with a live display showing donations as they arrived. That display mattered more to me than any speech ever had. When the run started, I walked the first mile, then I jogged the second. By the finish line, I was crying. Of course I was crying, because I will probably cry for Miles until I am too old to stand on my own. But this time the tears were not for betrayal, they were for him, for the child he was. For the truth that his death, awful as it was, could still be turned toward care without being twisted into someone else's opportunity. After the run, one of the charity staff showed me the total raised and the immediate screening appointments it would fund. "This is going directly to kids who need it," she said. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. That should have been the easy version from the beginning, the one we all believed we were building. Instead, we had spent 3 years financing a lie and calling it legacy. I still think about how easily it worked. I think about how grief can make you grateful for almost anything that seems to help. I think about how a kind voice can disguise a selfish plan. I think about how many people never imagine that a memorial event could be used as cover because the idea feels too cruel to even consider. That is what Rhett counted on. He counted on my trust because he was family. He counted on the public's trust because the event was emotional. He counted on nobody wanting to question money raised in a dead child's name. And for 3 years, he was right. The consequence of that is something I still carry. Not because the case ended with a plea and restitution and some sense of legal closure, but because once someone teaches you that grief can be exploited, you never fully return to innocence. Every fundraiser, every donation page, every earnest speech about legacy gets filtered through a new awareness. That awareness is painful. It is also useful. I no longer confuse sincerity with safety. I no longer assume that a beautiful story means the money is being handled honestly. I no longer let sentiment replace verification. Those are hard lessons to learn from your own child's memory, and I would have preferred not to learn them at all. But if Miles's name is going to be used for something, I want it to be for truth, not manipulation. Rhett is paying restitution now. The business that once leaned on stolen run money is gone. Some of his former clients found new landscapers. The mortgage strain that he tried to hide with charity proceeds eventually caught up with him anyway. That was not enough to make me feel vindicated. It only made the ugliness feel complete. What matters more is that the charity now receives everything directly. The screenings go to kids who need them. Parents get the results. Some of those children will never know that one memorial run helped catch a problem before it became a tragedy. That is exactly how it should be. As for me, I still stand at the finish line every year. I still cry. I still think of Miles when I see little boys sprinting ahead of their parents, certain they are faster than the whole world. But now, when I wipe my face and look at the donation total on the charity's screen, I know the money is going where it belongs. I know nobody is hiding behind my son's name. And for the first time in a very long time, that knowledge feels like a kind of peace.